electronic reporting of VAT audit data file combined with VAT declaration for Poland. We will use often in this presentation abbreviation JPK, JPK VAT, JPK VDEC actually. For all of those you who are not familiar with Polish business requirements, those abbreviations stands in general for Consolidated Control File for VAT, but basically those implementations follow rules of SAFT, which is international standard for audit in taxes. That standard was established by OECD organization. If I'm not mistaken, it was 2005 when the first version of SAFT has been published. And European Union countries were first countries around the world which adopted those standards, but there is much more many countries right now following those standards in tax reporting to government, but also tax reporting as tax books to auditors. And regarding agenda, regarding flow of this session, firstly, we will go over high-level requirements for this new type of VAT reporting in Poland. And then we'll go into details how we design process of creating these new audit files in Dynamics. We want to spend majority of the session talking about implementation in Dynamics 365 for Finance, but also in the end, we'll provide overview about solution which has been just published on LCS for AX 2012 R3. As Leslie mentioned, recording of this session and this presentation deck will be shared. I've just noticed someone asked this question. So don't worry about it. After the session, you will have access to this deck. Everything what we are saying also will be recorded and available after. And the availability of this things to download is, I think, in the same place where you registered for the session. Also, as Leslie mentioned, you can write questions during the presentation, and we'll try to answer. When I'm speaking, Lisa will try to address majority of the questions, so we'll address them live. But in case your questions will not be answered, we will publish with deck frequently asked questions and answers. Also, if you are customer or a partner and you participate in Dynamics Early Adopters program, you may contact us through Yammer. You know, we are managing a Yammer group for early adopters, and the link to the Yammer group will be available also at the end of the presentation in the section for the useful links. Okay, back to the main subject of this presentation about VAT changes in VAT reporting in Poland. So the concept of JPK is known across companies doing business in Poland. It has been introduced a long time ago for other areas, and that concept of JPK or SAF for audit reporting, or actually on-demand reporting, has been introduced a few years ago. But recently, Poland has joined European-wide effort for fighting tax evasion or tax fraud. And a few years ago, there have been introduced requirements to submit to authorities detailed records from tax books. As you remember, JPK VAT, which is basically VAT register, was introduced some time ago as a mandatory requirement. The works on the new JPK VAT or JPK VDEC started last year, and Ministry of Finance consulted their plans with Polish business, auditors and software providing companies. As many of you who are familiar with the subject know, after the review of first version of this project, there was lots of feedback given to government, mostly because there were quite revolutionary concepts about grouping transactions and marking them for recognition by tax authorities, which was never before practiced, but also kind of not aligned with previous reporting standards. So also in results of those consultations, the first date for using the JPK VDEC or VAT has been moved many times. And actually, just a few days ago, our regulatory alerting network informed us about another postponement. Current status is that October will be the first month to start reporting with the new structure of the JPK VAT file, which will include the VAT declaration. Those of you who are closely tracking our regulatory feature delivery roadmap, or those of you who participated in our early adopter program, know that we released JPK VDEC actually in February this year. It was available for testing. However, each of those postponements by government meant also for us changes, because the Minister of Finance usually progresses with new changes. Therefore, there will be provided at the end of this presentation deck list of KB articles with detailed instructions how to configure JPK VAT in the system, but please make sure you read all of them and choose the latest with the latest changes and latest configurations. And going into the details, maybe this slide is very busy, but it is, if you look at it, it's quite self-explanatory. From very high level, the main change in VAT reporting is combining previously required multiple files for VAT reporting. So actually, until October this year, companies still must deliver separately electronic file called VAT register and VAT declaration. But the new VAT register, or JPK VAT, actually will consist of 2 reports in one file. Besides, there is many variations of VAT declarations in Poland, like VAT 12, VAT 27, VAT ZZ, VAT ZT, etc. And this JPK VDEC will replace them all. On this slide, you can see main structure of the JPK VAT file, and specifically the monthly report structure. The XML schema of the file is to some extent human readable. Primary file is divided into declaration part, which representing traditional declaration boxes with summarized amounts in certain categories. And the second part of the file is dedicated to records of sales and purchase, which actually represents analytics for VAT declaration boxes. So we are here focusing on monthly reporting of JPK VAT, which is applicable for most of the companies, like large and medium size in Poland. But please note that there is still some kind of inconsistency in regulations regarding quarterly reporting, which is specific to rather smaller segment of the business, and the small business will be required to deliver on monthly basis this file, but the meaningful VAT declaration will be considered only quarterly, and the part of the file which is related to VAT declaration on the months, which is not specific to declaring VAT for quarterly reporting companies, can be omitted or can be delivered. This is the inconsistency which you should probably clarify in the interpretations. However, for all monthly reporting companies, all the sections of the files are mandatory. That's why you have this. We have placed in Polish this note here, which is probably most applicable for the majority of the audience. And going further into the details, the major innovation introduced in the register part of the JPK VAT is mandatory segregation of transactions because products of services grouping. Additionally, types of transactions must be recognized according to their specific type. The new requirements from Minister of Finance introduced a grouping of sales transactions for specific groups of services into categories. Those are reported under elements which are selected on this slide from GTU 01 to GTU 13, and we'll call them further in this session goods and services supplying types. So just in case you're translating that from Polish, we just chose this goods and services supplying types. This is how we call them. This is how we call them in the documentation. Besides, there is requirement about recognition of specific type of transactions and group them under set of markers. All those groupings are represented by those letters without numbers, markers, and we'll call them further in this session and also in the documentation as procedural markings. We recognize all those innovations in VAT reporting, those markers require from companies detailed analysis of their transactions in order to properly report them. And currently in Poland, there is lots of available interpretations on the websites, on the financial newspapers, and also some auditing companies provide some guidance, specifically how to apply those new regulations and to the grouping of transactions and the recognition of groups and services. And that's for the purpose to correctly report them in the new JPK VAT. From our perspective, this analysis, this rethinking of your tax setup is quite necessary here. Those new regulations may result in necessity to introduce additional sales tax codes or groups in order to align it with those requirements for this new file reporting. And actually, this postponement till October is just a bonus time for adjustment of your tax setup. So please do not procrastinate doing this analysis if you haven't done that yet. With this feature, we are going to present. We will deliver only report. It's very important to realize. So I'm stressing that again. The solution for JPK VAT is only the report, which is configurable. And the report is mainly based on transactions posted in the system. So we do not deliver any changes in transactional part of the application, but just the report. And the report, we use multiple attributes for filtering to classify transactions and include them into the report. But remember, primary attribute is just the sales tax code. Now let's talk about details how JPK VAT works in Dynamics 365 for Finance. And in this section, we will provide you with the demo, how the feature works and how to set up it. Also, we'll provide some guidance on set up special use cases for VAT reporting. In general, it's important to realize that the solution for Dynamics 365 Finance for reporting JPK VAT consists of three major elements. Firstly, as I mentioned, we deliver configurable electronic report implemented in electronic reporting framework. That's not new. We delivered JPK audit files implemented in the same way. However, this report, unlike the previous ones, requires configuration. So there is a special section in electronic reporting which you could use to provide this configuration. And further in this session, Elisaveta will guide you through the configuration of the report. The configuration is required mainly to associate sales tax codes and other criteria for selecting GTUs, those goods and services supplying types, and procedural markings. There is also required setup to identify sales and purchase document types depending on your system setup, which we cannot predict from high level. And the second part of the solution is the framework of execution of the report. We use electronic messages framework, which provides capabilities to implement kind of a workflow which allows to generate in a logical way and also to split the workflow tasks across different users in the company. So this workflow the last piece of the solution is actually the configuration of the workflow. We deliver a package which after you import that to the system through data management, enables the workflow to be practically ready to use. And now that is the time for the demo. I will switch to my virtual machine and provide you with a quick overview how the feature works. Let me enter the password. The session died after a few minutes. So I'm presenting to you the finance and operations, the preview versions, our local version of the system, but the feature works in the versions which will be available for you. And as I said, the major workflow for this feature is located in electronic messages. If you haven't used electronic messages before, electronic messages are located in the module of tags. And excuse me, I need to wait a little bit for the VM to wake up. Okay, as it usually happens in Microsoft presentations, the system needs to reboot. I apologize for that. So let's wait a little minute for session to be reestablished. We're back again. So I'm going back to module of tags. And electronic messages are located under inquiries and reports. There's the main workflow workspace for electronic messages, which I will be using, but also setup of this feature is located in setup for tags, electronic messages. We do not require any setup to be done basically after importing the package of configuration of the workflow, but anyway, you can change whatever you want. This workflow is fully configurable. There is no any low-level code behind it, how this workflow works. So I'm going back to electronic messages, and after importing of this data package with configuration of electronic messages, you will see one workflow defined for generation of JPK V7M, which stands for VAT Declaration 7 monthly. And the workspace of the workflow is divided into the messages section, action log, and message additional fields. I will guide you through all of those sections once we will start with the workflow. So basically, tax accountant, when they want to prepare the new JPK VAT, they will start the new message, which represents like a step in the workflow. And this new message just has one action to initiate the workflow for JPK VAT. And this action requires some configuration before we generate report, before we execute the next step. Primarily, I need to select here the scope of the dates to select my transactions, which must be included into the JPK VAT, the VAT declaration and VAT register. And in the section of action log, you see all this log with messages, what was executed when, and then later we will see there will be also delivered results here. And in the section about message additional fields, we have a few fields of this tax declaration, which actually some of them cannot be determined directly from the querying the system. Some of them are referring to previously reported taxes. Some of them are just text fields with some justifications. So we use capability of this electronic messages to define additional fields, and out of values provided here in the user interface of electronic messages, the values of those fields, data from those fields, will be included directly to generated file. For instance, there is this tag in the file called code urzędu, which stands for the code of the tax authority where we're reporting. And here, each company needs to define this accordingly to their codes, their known codes for tax authorities. This code can be pre-populated if you know that code, and this is the only code you will be using. You can configure those additional fields like default values in configuration of electronic messages, but as it comes configured by us, it comes empty. We do not source this code from any place in the system, so all of those data here is like manual entry. When I feel I'm ready with additional fields and I'm ready with the dates, I can proceed with the next step of the workflow, which is actually generation of the report. I'm clicking here, generate the report, and again, I'm initiating a set of actions. The system will initiate another next step in the workflow. I click OK, and here we have a message. We have a message for the tax accountant. Obviously, everyone is very responsible in accounting, in taxes, reporting specifically, but still, there is a section of the VAT declaration which requires accountant to confirm conformance with the regulations. And especially many of you familiar with the subject of tax reporting in Poland, you know that every mistake in tax declarations or tax reports has its price. So this is just a reminder. And by the way, the new JPK VAT has changed some regulations about correcting mistakes. So please take a look into the details of those regulations. I think the new stuff which came with the new regulations for JPK VAT is that you have basically 14 days from submission to auto-correct your mistakes, resubmit your VAT declaration. But after 14 days from submission, if tax authorities discover mistakes, every mistake has its price, and sometimes very severe. So back to this message. If you don't like this message, you still can you can configure the steps in the electronic messages. As I mentioned, everything here is configurable, and actually remove it or modify according to your best judgment. So I will proceed with OK. I agree with the rules. And here is actually the first step where we will generate the tax declaration, where actually we will run this report, which also requires some configuration after importing to the system. So here I'm just clicking OK, but in case you have some special requests around like filtering the declaration, like for analytical purposes, in preparation process, you can always filter that accordingly to the rules how Dynamics 365 for Finance works. This dialog is just a standard dialog to execute the report. Let it give it a minute to run. The report is being run, and actually I don't have too many transactions in the system, but it takes some time to call all the data sources. As you can see, the result of this task was generation of the file. There we have another item in the action log with results. And if you haven't noticed, there's some trick. This log generation of the file, the results of it are here in the attachments. So this when you stand contextually on the log line, in the attachments, you will see the number 1, which means there's one attachment waiting for you. We store results of this electronic report generation in the attachments of FNO, so they are always like in one place. You can access this attachment just going to attachments and select appropriate attachment. You can open it here. And accordingly to your workflow with managing documents, you can save it in specific location or save and open in the default location for downloading files in your browser. And here it is the JPK VAT file. As I mentioned earlier, it's almost human readable, so you can easily recognize the sections of a header, nagłówek, section identifying the taxpayer, and section related to tax declaration, with all these positions which are called, which I mentioned, are called, in my understanding, boxes, from like paper form of tax declarations with straightforward transitions to electronic file, and the evidence, the actual VAT register comes here. We have sales section with all these markers and positions, so which represents transactions related to sales. We have purchase sections with positions related to purchase. So purpose of viewing this report is just to compare with other places in the system, to make sure that we are reporting proper amounts and everything else is fine in terms of like presence of data in required tags or nodes of that file. If you're happy with it, you can go back to electronic messages and basically submit this report to tax authorities. But as a last step in that workflow in electronic messages, you can update the status that the file has been reviewed and actually submitted. There is another new status available in change status action. When we change the status, the difference is that after changing the status, this file cannot be deleted and the log stays in the system. But at any time, the person who will have privileges to run this step can go back and change back to the previous step and make some corrections. As I mentioned, this electronic messages is fully configurable. It's fully configurable also from perspective of privileges. So you can imagine in the workflow, you can divide the steps for preparation of the report and reviewing accordingly to your hierarchy in tax department. One person can have access only to creation and generation of the report. Another person can review it and actually approve it and submit. This is all configurable. You can refer to documentation, and actually in this deck you will also find the guidance about small configurations. That's it about the demo in the FNO. I will go back to my deck now, and in the deck you will find a little abbreviation of this demo. Just the major points: how to create, how to initiate the message, how to generate the report, what to remember about, how the steps go sequentially, and also a little bit handouts for security privileges and segregation of duties and roles. You can configure those privileges on the steps of electronic messages and make it more customized for a workflow in your real business in the company. And at this time, I will hand over to Elizaveta, who will guide you with the details about the solution setup. So, Elizaveta, in your hands.
Thank you, Adam. Can you see my screen?
Yes, correct.
Okay, super. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much, Adam, for super comprehensive overview and demo of the business user scenario to report new VAT declaration with registers in Poland starting from October. I'm also very glad to welcome all the auditory on our demo session today, dedicated to implementation of new report for Poland. There are coming so many interesting and good questions. Thank you very much. As Adam mentioned, we were calling this report initially as JPK VDEC, and now we are accommodating the report name to the latest used by the Minister of Finance of Poland to call it JPK V7M. As soon as now we are in this period of renaming, please consider both names as just two names of the same report. My part of this demo is dedicated specifically to more deep technical part, as I'm going to tell you about how to set up Dynamics 365 Finance to get it ready for JPK V7M reporting. I do hope this demo will make a kind of roadmap to set up process for you. And well, let's have a look into steps we go through to get our Dynamics 365 Finance ready for JPK V7M reporting. As Adam has shown in his demo, a solution is based on supposition that all the necessary tax information is in tax transactions, and the end user shall not do any new specific actions to mark additionally taxable documents to make it possible to reflect this document correctly in V7M report. And before we start looking into the steps, I wanted to mention that we assume that all the necessary setup in VAT is applied, meaning enough to get correct JPK VAT registers first of all, meaning that the minimum beginning setup conditions are already in the system, and they are at least reporting codes are set up in the system and are already associated appropriately with tax sales tax codes. The sales tax codes expected to be considered for V7M report are of standard VAT or reduced VAT types. Date of VAT register is used for transactions and filled in properly. Thus, all these circumstances together with proper JPK VAT reporting generation, we consider as kind of prerequisites for our setup for JPK V7M reporting. And now we are ready to talk specifically about JPK V7M setup. And first of all, we should start with importing of new electronic reporting format and setting up application-specific parameters for this format. When setup of electronic reporting on electronic reporting site is completed, we will proceed with electronic messaging functionality setup, which, as Adam has shown, is used as a workflow for the reporting process for this feature. Electronic messaging setup is composed in general of 3 steps, which are importing of the predefined setup via data entities, setting up of number sequences for electronic messaging, and setting up parameters of the executable class which runs the report. Well, now we can go to the system. Okay. We can go to the system to watch all the steps in Dynamics 365. And first of all, we go to electronic reporting module. And first thing we should do is to go to the repositories to we find Microsoft configuration provider and click on repositories button here. We select global configuration repository because this is currently the main place where we publish all the new configurations and also all the updates and new versions of the electronic reporting configurations which are in support by Microsoft. And the new format, there was also a question about it. It is based on the same model mapping as other 5 Polish reports. I'm searching for V7M report because the format was already published with the new name. So it is named like JPK V7M XML format PL, and it is located just under the standard audit file model together with other 5 Polish JPK reports like accounting books, bank statement, inventory, VAT invoices, and VAT register, which is the most famous, I would say. The new format also uses the same model mapping, which is standard audit file model mapping. For new report, we just need to select it here in the configurations tree and click on the import button here. In my case, as you can see, this format just already imported because I did it preliminary to this session. But in general case, we click on import button and this format will come to your system. So now we are going back to electronic configurations workspace to see the new format. As I said, it is located under standard audit file model. And here we are. First of all, after update or importing or after importing of a new, for example, configuration in our case, we always recommend to check that your model mapping which you are going to use is still marked as default for model mapping. It is important to be sure that during the runtime of the report, the proper model mapping will be used. For our format, we now need to only set up the application specific parameters for it. How we are going to set them up? We select our format first of all, and on the action pane under the configurations, we have application specific parameters group, and we click on setup button here. Here, I would like to say, first of all, a couple of words about the application-specific parameters in general. This feature was introduced, this is also a kind of feature, right, in electronic reporting. And it was introduced not long time ago and was already used in implementation of recent requirements in JPK FO report, which is for invoices, as you know, because it is very useful when we need to introduce a kind of dependency in the algorithm of a report on a company-specific master data. This feature allows us to avoid necessity of country-specific extensions on an application side of the system when some particular requirements must be implemented to cover needs of one country-specific report. With this approach, we potentially simplify further extensions of such algorithm, provide an application independent configurable way of defining reporting rules. At the same time, this approach also makes it possible to use the reporting feature also outside of the country context for which it was initially introduced. Like, for example, even now when data VAT register feature became globally available under feature management, companies with primary address outside of Poland will be able to start using this report much more easier, spending much less efforts than in the past when all the country requirements were implemented under specific country context only. Thus, application-specific parameters on the format is a kind of one more step in direction of globalization of local features. Well, how these application-specific parameters are used in our new V7M report. As Adam has explained in the report schema overview, there are many different properties of invoices to be reported in the new format of registers, and especially it is related to the sales register, for which there were introduced 25 different properties, or we also call them markers because they can obtain just one possible value or to be omitted when they are not applicable for a specific invoice. Thus, in case when we deal with supply of, for example, alcoholic beverages or tobacco products or electronic devices or some other specific goods or services mentioned as to be specifically reported we must report related invoices with appropriate marker in the register. As soon as master data setup may differ from one company to another, there was introduced a variety of different conditions so that any company could find the proper criteria to specify. And for example, for service delivery selector, we are able to specify conditions based on tax code, item sales tax group, customer ID, and the customer group. And depending on each lookup field, we consider it to add different types of those conditions. It is important to know that for each lookup field, you should always add at the end of the conditions list a value for which you will define like a not blank condition. And even if your company is not using some of the lookup fields, like for example, your company never do any import transactions. In this case, you should set up at least those two conditions to let the report run appropriately during the reporting runtime. So you should define not blank condition for all the criteria, and also blank conditions for those cases in which you assume that probably some of the conditions can be empty. This is, for example, important for transactions like a direct posting with tax code. When you post the transaction directly from general ledger, journal, and you are using directly a sales tax code, so you do not specify any sales tax group or item sales tax group, and such transaction has no customer or vendor identifier. For this purpose, to have the report working properly, you have to specify condition with blank values as well. When application-specific parameters setup is completed, you should change the status to completed. Before you change the status to completed, your configuration will not be considered by the system at all. And if you even provided all the setup, but did not save it with completed status, you will get the kind of exception from the system in the runtime that system cannot find your configuration for application-specific parameters. So make sure that you have saved your configuration is completed. Basically, the status can be changed back at any time, and even completed configuration can be adjusted at any time as well. If a new version of the format was delivered and the structure of the lookup fields is the same in the new version, we hope that we will not provide much more changes in the structure in the future. You can obviously use import and export functions here to quickly move your configuration from the old version to the new one. When you save your configuration, it will be saved as an XML format. Okay, now we are done with our application-specific parameter setup. We assume so, at least. And when we have completed this setup, electronic messages functionality will need to be also set up. And first of all, hide this. No. Yeah. First of all, we should go to the LCS portal and to visit the shared asset library, because this is the place where we usually publish like packages of configurations or setup of data entities, which are used in the electronic messages. Basically, the electronic messages functionality includes a number of entities which we have to set up. And moreover, sometimes in our solutions, we were for the reporting features, we use electronic messaging setup data in the electronic reporting configurations. Thus, it became a kind of already tradition to publish here in database package section of this shared asset library, to publish here, data packages. Here in data packages section, we publish a package of data entities with predefined setup of electronic messaging. As you can see, now it is the first in the list because we just recently republished it with the new name of the report. So first of all, we simply click here on the link and save it as a zip file on your machine. Then with this package, we go to electronic data management first, to the data management, because we need to import this configuration to our legal entity. We click on import button to create a new project of data importing to the system. Sometimes when you, for example, we specify name, Polish JPK, for example, V7M setup. And then here on the add file button under selected entities, first up, we select the file which we have previously saved from the shared asset library of the LCS portal. Okay, when you do this for the first time, this may take some minutes, about 5 or sometimes even 10. Just keep waiting until you will see here in the table all the data entities shown. Now we will not spend too much time, I think, waiting until the list will be filled in with the data entities, just to save time for this session. Basically, when the data entities are listed, we simply click on import button here, and the information from the Excel files from the package coming directly to your database. After this simple import, we assume that your your electronic messaging functionality is almost ready to work. And the next thing we should go, actually it is already listed, so I would click here on import button to make the electronic messaging setup in my system. Okay, next step would be to go to general ledger parameters to check that number sequences for electronic messaging are at place, or if they are not at place, we would need to set at least number sequence for messages, because this feature does not include any electronic message items, which are also possible to include, but in our case we will deal with only electronic messages. So here in the general ledger parameters on the number sequence page, we will find a number sequence for messages and for message items. You can set up both, or as I said, for messages only in the case of this feature. The next thing we should do, and this is mandatory step, we should go to tags, set up electronic messages and initiate the executable class, which will be run during the report generation. Basically, this line is delivered here via that package. because this is a part of electronic messaging setup. And the only thing you should do here is to initiate parameters of this class. For this purpose, we click on Parameters button on the action pane. And sometimes some classes may have some parameters. In our case, we just simply may adjust sometimes the query for this report if we would like to, but in general case, we should click on the OK button. It is important to click on OK button when you just set up feature for the first time, because this is the way how the executable class is initiated. Without this, you will get an exception during the runtime of the report, and that exception will inform you that the parameters of your executable class are not saved. If you get such exception, you should know that you just go to executable class settings of the electronic messaging and initiate them here. And the last thing we should visit during our setup is to go directly to the setup of the electronic message processing. This is the main thing, which the main place where we define the chain of actions which will be run during runtime of our report. First of all, it will be we will create an electronic message just like Adam was showing to you. Then we can generate report, and this is the action which runs the executable class. If we simply click on this action, we will go to the parameters of this action, and we will see that this is an action of message execution level, and this action has association with that executable class that was just initiated, and at the same time it is associated with our format as well. We also may observe here that this action will be available for messages in these statuses, and as a result of working of this action, our message will get a new statuses like this in technical error case, and if it is successfully executed, this status. Okay, and the third action is optional, as Adam was showing. So basically here, what we shall do, we do not have any message items in this processing, as I said, so we do not have any additional fields, but we have additional fields for our message, and this is the place where we define default values for our additional fields of the message. Just for example, go to JEDU, you should define specifically here. This does not mean that you cannot change this value during the report generation. If this field, we can quickly go to observe this field. If this field has a user edit property as yes, this means that the user will be able to change the value of this field. If you want to lock the possibility of editing of this field during the report generation, you can quickly change this option here. You can also hide some fields which you assume definitely will not be in use in your company. For example, P61, I think will never be used in my company. So I can just simply mark it as hidden, and it will not appear in relation to the electronic messages created by the business user. This is about additional fields. And one more important thing to do here is about security roles. By default, we do not provide any setup here because we do not know what security roles you have and what security roles you use. And by default, on the electronic messaging page, only administrator will be able to see this processing. So as for example, is electronic messaging page will be opened right now on my machine by an accountant. Accountant will not see this processing. To make accountant see this processing, I will add this row here. As soon as this row is added, any user of accountant security role will be able to see the processing in the electronic messaging page. So that was the last thing about setup. I think we can go back to the presentation, and looking back, we have reviewed the process of setup. We went through the following steps. First, we imported new electronic reporting format, configuration, and set up application specific parameters for it. We also defined two number sequences used by electronic messaging functionality. Then we downloaded the package of data entities for electronic messaging setup from the LCS and imported the data from it to the system. And after all, we initiated parameters of the executable class. We specified the authority code and security roles for the processing. All these steps are very important for your setup, and if you will go like properly step by step, all the steps actually are explained also in the KB articles. You will get your system ready for reporting of JPK V7M. Okay, now we are done. When we are done with the setup part of our presentation in Dynamics 365 Finance, and we can move on with the next section of this webinar, which is dedicated specifically to reporting of some scenarios. As you probably know, the initial version of this feature was released already several months ago for preview, so that companies were able to familiarize with the solution and provide some feedback to us and start preparing. And as one of the results, we received also some questions from our partners, and we are actually super thankful to the active partners and customers for their questions and feedbacks, because this is the way for us to know how we can do better, how we can improve our solutions for our customers. And among those questions, the most frequent was about reporting of invoices for which split payment procedure was applied. This is why we decided to include this information additionally to the KB article, so that everyone who interested in this scenario could quickly find this information. And also I dedicated a slide here in this session to the split payment scenario. From the perspective of the V7M report, the requirements in relation with split payment is quite clear. We should mark additionally the invoice with MPP marker if for this invoice split payment procedure was applied. And it is the same in both registers, sales and purchases. And in general, the questions about this case were like, what we should set up additionally to get MPP reported for an invoice, or where can we find MPP marker? And the answer on all the questions like that is the following. There is no specific marker for split payment, and you do not need to mark anything else specifically to get invoice reported with MPP marker. In current implementation of split payment feature on the accounts payable side, you should have set up a payment specification which is set up as split in the payment specification parameter. And as soon as this specification was applied during vendor invoice posting, this invoice will be reported with MPP marker. And the same on accounts receivable side, with only difference that the split payment parameter must be applied there on the level of method of payment. Well, this is what I wanted to share in relation with split payment scenario. And I have prepared one more slide about some special case in JPK V7M reporting. It is about so-called overdue invoices. And while on accounts payable side, the reporting requirements are more or less familiar because we already reported in JPK VAT registers overdue vendor invoices, in a special way. And in JPK V7M report, the only difference in reporting will be that VAT amount of overdue invoice must be reported in K46 element instead of K49 as it was in VAT registers. And for paid overdue invoices, VAT amount will be reported in K47 element instead of K50. And obviously both invoices in this case, I mean overdue and paid overdue, will be marked as internal documents in the document type field of the invoice. When on accounts receivable side, we implemented specifically new algorithm which covers the requirement to specifically mark correcto podstavi opodete marker for overdue and paid overdue invoices together with internal document type. And also taxable base and VAT amounts of overdue invoices will be respectively reflected in P68 and P69 elements of the declaration part, meaning that they will be collected through all the invoices with such case overdue case through all the invoices in the register. For both sides, accounts payable and accounts receivable, you do not need to do any additional setup or markers. You should use just Polish local feature overdue debt VAT. As soon as the feature was used, meaning that an invoice was processed through specific overdue debt VAT journal, system will be able to figure out that this is an overdue or paid overdue invoice and report it appropriately in JPK V7M report. Those of you who are probably not that much familiar with this feature, please kindly find the reference on the related documentation in the KB article here on the bottom of the slide. Okay, now I shall move to the next part of the session because today I know there are attendees specifically waiting for this content because this part of the presentation is about our solution for Dynamics AX 2012 R3. And I will start directly from setup of this feature. And first of all, this is an AIF report, which means that the principle of data collecting and its representation in the report is the same as in other JPK Polish reports. And almost all the setup steps are pretty like the steps for any other JPK reports in AX. I will run the machine preparing. Okay, as I said, the steps in relation to AIF are the same. we should export resource file and set up outbound ports. Then we should import XSD schema as new XML schema name, and we should set up reporting codes for new XML schema elements. And the only new step in the setup needed specifically for JPK V7M report, which company will need to do, is about markers of the invoices. So now we can go to the system and quickly go through the steps. First of all, we go to out and find among the resources the new one. It is called report JPK PL. We should open it, and by export button, it will be exported as an XSLT file. As soon as it is exported, we go to the system administration, and under setup, services and application integration framework, we have outbound ports of electronic audit reports. By create and update port button, we will get a new format created in the list. It will be called like SAF VAT declaration with registers, and it will be of SAF VAT declaration with registers type. The only thing we will do here, we will go to the XSLT repository and import just saved XSLT file. Then we will select it here as an XSLT ID. We also may define default export paths and other parameters as we usually do. As soon as this is done, we go to General Ledger module, and under setup, sales tax external, as we usually do for AIF reports, we open sales tax reporting XML codes. Here we will import XSD schema. Usually we as a Microsoft do not deliver this schema, and you should find and download the schema directly from government sources. So when you obtain this XSD schema, you shall import it here and associate with the new format which we have created in the ports. This format will be of the type which is defined for our new format. As you can see, all the elements of the new schema will come from the XSD file, and which is new. This is an annotation field. This field is filled in automatically from the XSD schema. So the annotation you can find here is not like our invention. It is like properly copied and pasted text from the XSD file, which was originally introduced by the Ministry of Finance. So as soon as we have imported the XSD schema here, we shall go to sales tax reporting codes. And we assume that you have already here set up at least for the VAT register. And what you should do here is to create a kind of mapping for your new format. So you create lines here just as you did for the VAT register, and you map them to the new reporting codes which are not used in the sales tax code setup, but you associate your new elements with the reporting codes which are really used by the tax code. This process is very similar to the setup of the JPK FA report for invoices. Just I wanted to pay attention that some fields of JPK V7M report may differ from those which were used in the JPK VAT registers. As for example, looking with attention to the schema, we can find out that, for example, the code which was previously reported in K43 now will be reported in K40. This means that for such cases, you will use reporting codes like 43 here and 40 here. All these things you will also find in the KB article, just to draw additional attention to this thing. So here we are specifying setup only for those elements of the report which will collect and represent data from the tax transactions, meaning registers. We do not provide here any setup for the declaration part, only transactions. And all of these things was I was talking right now are more or less common for all the IF reports and are already well known. The only thing which differs in the setup of this report is related obviously to markers, because this is a new thing in general. As you know, in finance, we have a set of nice application-specific parameters which allow user to set up different combinations of different master data sources. Here in AX 2012, for this purpose, we use electronic reporting properties. This is a new thing in Polish localization, but the new thing in general in AX. These properties were introduced for several master data forms in the system to allow a business user to mark those markers which must be associated with a specific marker in the report. Thus, you can define markers on the level of sales tax codes here, or sales tax groups. Here, you will find the same button where you can mark. To mark, you should put just one, like this. When I put value 1 for master data, this means that all the tax transactions with AP DOM sales tax group will be reported with related marker. The same you can do on the level of item sales tax groups. As you can see, the same button. And so on with the customers master data, vendors master data, and also customers and vendors groups. All this information is also included into the KB. Just in general, how it works. And this is important to understand when you start thinking on which master data to mark for which marker. During the report generation, system collects all the tax transactions just as it was in the past for VAT registers. And additionally, system checks for all the master data of the transaction whether it has any marker applied. As for example, if for a customer you set up GTU1 marker, all the invoices with this customer will be marked with this marker. Moreover, if the system during report generation finds out that, for example, GTU1 is applied to the customer of an invoice, and together with this, on the level of item sales tax group, GTU6 is applied to one of the tax transactions related to the same invoice, that invoice will be reported with both GTU1 and GTU6 markers, meaning that the system will collect as much markers as are associated with any available master data of the invoice. And if the system finds several of them, several markers will be reported for the same invoice. Okay. I think that was more or less comprehensive about markers, and at least in general sense how we understand how this works, and you always can refer back to the KB article for more details. The article also includes the table explaining which sets of markers are available for each master data sources. And now we can consider that setup part is ready, and we can move on further to create the report. And here we are with our business user who wants to create a VAT declaration. The business user will find under Reports External Service and Application Integration Framework a new menu item called Self-VAT Declaration with Registers. This menu item opens not a regular AIF dialog, but a new specific form for this report. Here, business user will create lines for the new report and generate the report itself. So first of all, our business user will click on New button and specify the period of dates, like for example for May 2020. In the description, business user may specify some description just for reference, and in the format, business user will select self-VAT declaration with registers. When record is saved, XML schema name field will be available to select the schema. Why we need to select schema here? Sometimes we may want to report some amounts in the declaration part which cannot be collected from the transactional data. Like for example, our business user may decide to report, for example, an amount is P39. P39 should be the value of surplus of input VAT over output VAT moved from the previous period. And here, business user will specify the value which must be reported in the declaration with P39 element. The same, for example, P49, which is the amount spent on the purchase of cash registers to be deducted like this. Okay, as soon as business user decides that he or she applied all the necessary amounts here, business user clicks on Generate Report button on the action pane of this form, and here we are with the general common AIF dialog form. Here, business user may specify version number, select the authority, format is already predefined, and dates already predefined and even logged. Here we can also specify the file name where to save the report. And this is a similar window that Adam shown you in finance with the declaration text, meaning that business user must accept that he or she feels full responsibility for the declaration that will be generated and all the amounts in it. Okay, let's have a look at the report which was generated. It is in accordance with the latest published by the Ministry of Finance version, which was published on May 8, 2020. So here we are with the report. Okay. Coming back now and back to our presentation and looking back to review what we got from the demo. We, on a very high level, reviewed the setup process, which is a usual setup for AIF reports, with an extension of setting up electronic reporting properties to specify those master data in the system, which will help the system to report markers. And we also had a look at the business user process, which allows user to create new JPK V7M report, manage a register of reports, and generate JPK V7M report in the XML format according to the latest requirements. And just one more slide about the X2012 R3 to inform that the hotfix for this version is also already available on the LCS, as well as the KB article with all the details on setup and usage of this feature. It is also published. And this is the last slide for you in today's content, where we collected all the links which can be useful for you in the process of the feature setting up and usage as well. And I personally thank you very much for your kind attention to this session. I hope this content was useful. And now back to Adam, to you, whether there are any questions to discuss, if obviously we have time.
Sure, Lisa. We have only a few minutes left, but I was very busy answering the questions. I hope I answered majority of them, but still